Hi there and welcome to this lecture about the Crusades. My name is Marcus Henriksson and I'm a history teacher here in Sweden. So what were the Crusades? Well, according to most historians, they are the holy wars ordered by the Christian Pope. But according to some historians, they don't just want to accept the fact that they are Christian wars, but all religious wars. And if we, for example, let's say accept that interpretation, then the Crusades are still going on today, just in smaller scales. Before the Crusades, we can see that the Muslims had expanded their empire considerably just in a few hundred years' time. They went out from the Arabic Peninsula and then defeated both the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire, because these two empires had been at war with one another for a long time and basically made each other weaker. So after the Muslims and the Arabs had gained control over the Middle East, they then expanded into Europe, Northern Africa, and so on. They even had wars with China. Baghdad during this time was the world's second largest city. And for over 100 years, it had over 1 million inhabitants. This can be compared with, let's say, Paris or London, for example, which during this time had around 20,000 to 30,000 inhabitants. The Arabs had a fascination with science, so they gained a lot of prestige by acquiring a huge amount of scientific texts, poetry, and so forth, and combined this with their fascination of science. So they were really skilled at astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and natural science. But how did the First Crusade start? Well, in the year 1071, Jerusalem was conquered by Turkish Muslims. They drove away and killed thousands of Christians in the same city. This upset a bunch of priests and the Pope in Europe. But during the year 1094, Christians and Jews were forced to wear black clothing and crosses if they were Christian and Stars of David if they were Jews. The Muslims also seized the money of all the churches and burnt down the most important church for the Christians in Jerusalem, the Holy Sepulchre. This was done by the leader of the Muslims in Jerusalem, al-Hakim. The Pope then decided to start a crusade, and it happened the year after, that is 1095. And he promised that everybody who would participate in this crusade would be free from their old sins and basically be guaranteed a place in heaven. He therefore said Deus vult, that is, God wills it, and after that they decided to gather as much soldiers as they possibly can in order to retake Jerusalem and to throw out the Muslims. And from basically every region in Europe, soldiers arrived, but most of them weren't knights, they were farmers. Over 90% of the First Crusader army were just ordinary farmers. And in total they had around 40,000 to 80,000 people. But yeah, they didn't have so many soldiers. So how would this go? There were some specific rules that applied to the people who joined the First Crusade. They were ordered to wear crosses on their clothing, and those who didn't do this, they were excommunicated. The Crusade, like I mentioned before, gave forgiveness for all your previous sins, and those who died during the First Crusade would become martyrs. But yeah, everybody had to finance their own trip. So most people sold off their whole house, their farms, their animals, and so on, because it was quite an expensive story. I mean, you need a lot of food in order to accomplish this, a lot of equipment, and so on. But yeah, they didn't just do this to eliminate all their previous sins. There were several reasons behind the First Crusade. Economical ones, the profitable Silk Road. Military, the Arabs were not allowed to expand their kingdoms closer to Europe. They were seen as a huge threat. Religious ones, yeah, many people wanted to reclaim the city where Jesus had been crucified, and the Holy Sepulchre, of course. Propaganda, the masses of Christian pilgrims that have been murdered. They mentioned this over and over again, so many people wanted revenge. During the First Crusade, we can say that it was an extremely bloody crusade. First, they needed more food and money in order to reach Jerusalem, so they looted both in Hungary and the Byzantine Empire. And most of the Christian peasants that joined the First Crusade were slaughtered in an ambush before they could reach Jerusalem. But the knights who went after the peasants had much more success. They took control of a city known as Nicaea in today's Turkey. A Christian opened the gates, and thousands of Muslims were killed when they took that city and when they took the city known as Antioch. This happened in the year 1097. When they gained control of Antioch, the Muslims tried to take it back, and it looked like they would succeed until the Christians found the so-called Spear of Destiny. That is, according to the legend at least, the spear who would have killed Jesus when he were on the cross. The Christians fought like madmen, and the Muslims fled the field. The Christians would then be able to kill all the Muslims in Jerusalem year 1099. And according to some historians, all Muslims in Jerusalem were killed. How many we don't know for sure, but several thousand. It could be as many as 100,000 or 200,000. When the Crusaders had taken control of Jerusalem, they formed a new country known as the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And they formed Christian orders of knights, such as the Knights Templar, the Teutonic Order, and so on. And they were collectively known as the Crusaders. Some of them would become extremely powerful, such as the Knights Templar. We don't know how they acquired huge amounts of wealth, but they did. According to some historians, they might have raided the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. We can't really know for sure. But they then borrowed this money out to several queens and kings in Europe, and basically created a modern banking system. They became so powerful that the French king decided that they were a huge threat, so he aligned himself with the Christian Pope, and then they exterminated every Knights Templar in the whole of Europe the same day, Friday the 13th, thereof the legend. During the Second Crusade, they tried to take the city Damascus, the capital of Syria, but they failed to do so. And internal conflicts stopped the Muslims from retaking Jerusalem for a long time. There were huge fights between Sunni and Shia Muslims, which weakened them both. But after a couple of years, this person gained control over the Muslim world. He's known as Saladin. And after he had gained control over the Muslim armies, he then decided that it was time to retake Jerusalem. During the year 1187, we have the Battle of Hattin, which is Saladin's greatest victory. He basically slaughtered an entire Crusader army. After that, he could quite easily recapture Jerusalem, and the Christians were forced to flee the country. Saladin's original plan was to murder every Christian in the city, but the Christians in the city threatened to fight to last man and also to kill all Muslim prisoners in the city if they wouldn't be allowed to escape. So Saladin agreed to their terms. Pope Urban III is said to have died of grief when he received the news a few weeks later that Jerusalem had been lost to the Muslims. The Third Crusade happened between the year 1189 to 1192, and several European rulers, including Philip II of France and Richard the Lionheart of England, decided to recapture Jerusalem. They didn't recapture Jerusalem because Richard the Lionheart chose to go home because his brother John planned to take over the throne, but they did, however, occupy and conquer Cyprus, which would later serve as a base for future Crusaders. And yeah, they also slaughtered a bunch of Muslims when they took the city of Acre. The Fourth Crusade happened in 1198. This time the Crusaders tried not to recapture Jerusalem, but instead attack Egypt. But first they attacked Hungary, again their own Christian brothers, because they needed money for all the ships. And once in Egypt, they met a considerable resistance. A man there told them that if they wanted help, he could open the city gates, but it was a trap and they were basically all slaughtered. You should know that there were 4 or 5 more crusades, but they all failed in one way or another. Not because of the skill of the army, but the Christians basically didn't want to accept peace agreements or terms, even when they were promised Jerusalem for free. So totally we have around 8 to 9 crusades against the Holy Land, and also a large number of crusades again against other non-Christian countries. I live in Sweden, and Sweden made some crusades, mostly against Finland, but also against Baltic countries and Russia. So how is the view on the Crusades today? Well, we can say that it has varied over time. Today, a common opinion is that they were basically a form of early colonialism. However, many researchers and historians believe that this is a misconception due to the fact that most crusaders and crusades were considered defensive projects because they were so threatened by the Arabic and Muslim expansion in Asia and the Middle East. The sources I have used for this lecture are History by Elisabeth Imansson, Robert Sandberg and Mattias Tudaj, Perspective on History by Lars Hans and Örjan Nyström, All-Time History Maxi by Hans Almgren, Börje Bergström and Arne Lavgren, A History of World Societies by John P. McKay, World History New Perspective by Clyde Ponting, Wikipedia, some documentaries, The Battle of Hattin, Saladin's Greatest Victory, The Trial of the Knights Templar, Friday the 13th, A Tour of Medieval Europe, Episode 1, The Holy Land, Crusades, BBC documentary, Clash of Titans, Crusade, BBC documentary, Victory and Defeat, Crusades, BBC documentary, Knights Hospitaller Origins, The Third Crusade, The Battle of Talas, Saladin the Conqueror of Jerusalem, Richard the Lionheart, The Crusader King, Early Muslim Expansion, The Dark Ages documentary, The Worst Strategic Failures of World Leaders, Retracing the Steps of the Crusades to the Holy Land timeline, The Wonders of Islamic Art, The Knights Templar documentary, War, Famine and Plague, What Really Happened During the First Crusade, Siege of Antioch, How Pope Urban II Sparked the First Crusade, The People's Crusade, Battle of Nanting. But if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Here we go, the overlooked Islamic inventions of the Dark Ages, the most violent year of the First Crusade. Yeah, you can see for yourself, the history of Baghdad, and so forth and so forth. And also this. I wish you a great day. Bye.